開始。保存したデータが上書き。ダーゴンはラブクラフトの作品をストーリーと世界観に焦点を合わせて忠実に再現したインタラクティブなゲーム。難しい選択アクションもなければ持ち物を管理する必要もなし、移動はストーリーに沿って進むごとに制限されます。インタラクティブ要素。興味深い事実を知ることができる。トリビアの中にはこの印を見つけるってことね。メインメニューからアクセス。あれ、動けない。あ、
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
死にそうなモルヒネ。薬物？麻酔だよね。販売されていた。注射。人気は高まった。薬物に夢に関するギリシャ神モルフェウスにちなんでモルフィウムと名付けていた。ダーゴン、やっぱダーゴンって言うんだ。出版された当時兵士の病気として知られていたモルヒネの乱用はすでに米国でアメリカで大きな問題を引き起こしていた。なんかこれトリビアがついてるのね。ああ、よだれが出てる。インク物書きなのかな。スイレーダー。こんなのあったかな。あ、これ大砲。第一次世界大戦。
So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
捕虜になったんだ。フン族。アジアの遊牧民フン族。ヨーロッパで支配権を確立。残忍で恐ろしい。弓投げ縄。工場兵器開発。襲撃の達人。イギリス人はドイツ人の残忍さを強調するためフンというドイツ人の同義語としてこれ本当の話なんだよね。ここは調べたら進むってこと。太陽かな。このトリビアは探さないと見つからないんだ。ボート。
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
捕虜だったけど逃げた。これ進むところ。欲しい。調べられるとこないかな。これか。じゃあ食料かなこれ。
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my
逃げるの怖っ。
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars.
太陽と星の位置から。
South of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
欲しい。太陽。何も調べられないね。こっちは綺麗じゃん。
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
水がないとね。お水？
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue.
ブロークンブルー？
The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
おう、イカ。はは言ってるよ。イカだ。
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish
幻覚見てんの
mire
かな。
which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence.
アンモナイトみたいのあるね。
There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
ん？なんか調べられる？タコみたいだけど。イカタコ貝。
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
これなんだっけ、あれみたい。昔の名前がわからん。これアンモナイト。お弁当箱みたいなのあるけど。カレー。
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
調べられないか。
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease.
乾いてんのこれ。
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
こうか？調べられないな。おお。骨かな。何これ？この世界観はいいね。本当にあるお話でしょ？クトゥルフの関係？太陽。あ、クジラ。かわいい。死んじゃってる？これデドバイの。なんだこれ。ヘビみたい。あそこ目指してんのか。あ、あるじゃん。クトゥルフだ、やっぱり。海の恐怖。クトゥルフ神話と架空の水中都市ルルイエを創造した著者は、 クトゥルフ作った人？水圧のため海底には住むことができないので海底に生命は存在できないと確信。今日暗い海底に多くの得意な生物が住んでいることが知られている。あ、今日じゃない、今日か。発見された最深海に生息する魚、マリアナスネイルフィッシュ。これ8000メートルの永遠の暗闇に海水面の何百倍もある極度の圧力下で生きることができる。アンコウ、オニキンメ、ホウライエソなどの深海の生き物の現代の写真とその生き物たちのラブクラフト的な特徴に目を向けると何らかの皮肉を感じずにいられない。ほーん。クトゥルフ神話作った人が作ったお話ってことかな。産地とかだよね。綺麗な山。丘かこれ山じゃないの。ああ、登れなかった。ギボス状。綺麗。
Determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset.
こんな夜
Picking
に
up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
登るん？荷物何も調べらんないかな。
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost.
Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined.
ここ行くの？
Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
特に何もない。
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
モノリスじゃないの？月。なんか調べらんないか。近づいた。
merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contours and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
何？どういう感情？なんもないか。
For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
あ、周囲を調べろって。ここしか調べらんなくない？おー。
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly, vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm,
模様書いてあるね。
and revealed the fact that a far-flung water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures.
ないか？
The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen.
動物の絵じゃない？
Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
どれ？物語を語る手法。ダゴンには多くのテーマや物語を語る手法が含まれているが、これらはラブクラフトが後期の作品で進化させたもの。石碑などを通して物語を語る。日記やキャラクターのメモ、海から浮かび上がる島。実際の出来事、神話に基づいたフィクションの生き物や神。人気のあるクトゥルフ神話の起源と考えられている。ラブクラフトの他の小説のいくつかもダゴンと同じような手法で集結する。エンディングを台無しにしないよう詳細はスキップ。喉痛い。画家どれ？人間。
At least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto,
人魚みたいだね。
paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters.
深海。おお。
Loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat,
襲われなかったんか。ここ見れるな。雨降ってんの。
I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections
More
of a great
water.
storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in
やっぱ狂っ
mid-ocean.
ちゃって幻覚
In
見て
my
たんかな。
delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
ジャーナリスト。ラブクラフトはアマチュアジャーナリズムの世界で著名。定期刊行物を出版し始めた。ラブクラフトと他の著者が書いた政治に関する解説、社会の解説、詩、短編小説、文芸批評。巧みに言葉を操ることができたか批判も受け付けていた。いいじゃんね。奇妙なフィクション。ダゴンはこの期間に書かれた短編小説。ホラーフィクションの巨匠であるラブクラフトが、これ名前なの？戦争と世界平和の考えに対する自分の意見を供述している。この人の意見？病院だ。
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
ダガンはペリシテ人の主神。中東で古代豊穣の神として崇拝。この神を戦争や征服の守護聖人として選んでいた。ダゴンはアッシリアの詩では死者の審判としてバビロニア語で記述された文書の一つには冥界の看守として登場。ヘブライ語のダグは魚という意味なので、なんとかった名前の感触により誤ったか。ダゴンは魚の神と思われることがある。魚のような特徴で、ダゴンは海に住んでいるアジンである深き者どもを支配している水中の神。ダゴンはダゴン秘密教団と呼ばれる秘密のカルトに崇拝されている。なんか宗教？ダガン。調べらんない。か。
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
オーガスト・ダーレスとクトゥルフ神話。オーガストはアメリカの作家、アンソロジーの編集者、ラブクラフトと親交があり、自分の会社からラブクラフトの作品を多数出版。ラブクラフトの死後、彼の作品の普及に大きく貢献したものの、論争に巻き込まれていた。ラブクラフトの世界観、幻想的恐怖へのアプローチと対照的な善と悪の協議。ダーレスはカトリックをクトゥルフ神話に導入したことはダーレスの問題がある決断の一つ。その結果、ラブクラフトの作品は今日の文化の中でしばしば誤解されたり誤って伝えられたりしている。 ラブクラフトは神話を作ることに興味がなく、クトゥルフ神話という言葉はラブクラフトがこの世界を去った後ダーレスが作ったものだということにも注目を値する点。クトゥルフ神話を作りたかったわけじゃないけど、クトゥルフ神話みたいになっちゃったってこと？ラブクラフトさんがクトゥルフ神話の起源みたいな。あれなんか回ったけどバグった感じ。画面が一周したね。時計か。誰？ここ何にもない？あんまないの？これか。クリックゲーだね。あれ？ここの部屋？ああ、モルヒネ。
But the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
これ？ラブクラフトとタバコと酒。ラブクラフトはタバコが大嫌い。自分を大人に見せるため。12歳の頃吸っていたが、友人であるラインハートとのやり取りの中で長ズボンを着るようになってからすぐやめた。酒に関しても強い意見を持っていた。手紙の中に書かれている。酒に関してはアルコールを美味しいと思ったこともなければ進んで飲みたいとも思わない。進化した人間の知性や想像力の繊細で自然な均衡を鈍らせたり、粗雑にするようなものに対して美学的に強い嫌悪感を感じる。酒を飲むと個人的に嫌悪感を刺激されるので私は飲まない。他の人は好きなようにすればいい。私は禁止を支持。反社会的な力の禁止と同様。薬物はやってたってことでも、モルヒネは。そっちもやばいよ
な。Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever.As I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may this very moment be crawling
謎が多いよね、まだ。
on its slimy bed, worshipping
ボートの下になんか来る？ 怖いよな、海は。よくこういう絵あるよね。ボートの下に魚影みたいな大きい。お、自由の女神？スタチュー・オブ・リバティだっけ？これだけ調べられる？幻覚が。この部屋なの？ああ、何？
God, that hand.
手なのこれ？
The window.
絵画が。
The window.
Window。Window。調べらんない？殺されたりしないよね。割るん？幻覚見て、あ、ポキって言ってる。幻覚見て、終わり？プレイしてた時ありがとうございます。これ何？これ今やったやつ？他のゲームや DLC。これなんか違うやつ？終了。これが今やったやつだよね。違うのあんのかな？ 見てみるか。それ有料かな。ありがとうございました。物語を読んでる感じだったね。トリビアちょっと見てみる。あ、何にも見つけてないじゃん。他にこんなにあったん？わからんな、どこにあったか。じゃあありがとうございました。これ見てみよう。